At an auction where they usually sold horses and rusted plows, they sold a woman with a sack over her head. A quiet farmer bought her for $1, just because he noticed her boots were too fine. Now she's riding with him through the hills, and he has no idea who she is. But one thing's certain, nothing will be the same from here on out. Ezekiel Brandt was a man of few words and fewer neighbors. He came into town twice a month for supplies and never stayed past sundown. Folks knew him as the quiet type who'd buried his wife 10 years back and hadn't said much since. That morning he'd ridden into Bellwether for seed in a new hoe handle. But as he passed the auction yard, something unusual caught his eye. Too quiet, too still for that noisy place. A cluster of onlookers stood with hushed murmurs around a platform that usually held skittish mares or sun-scorched saddles. But today, it held a woman. She stood barefoot but for a fine pair of hand-stitched boots. Her wrists were bound, a burlap sack tied over her head, the fabric stained with dirt and dried blood. Her dress, though torn, hinted at former elegance, lace trim and faded embroidery near the hem. "Last bid, gents," the auctioneer muttered uneasily. "Nobody wants her." Going once. A man in a long duster spat. "She's trouble. Ain't nobody buyin' no silent woman with a covered face. Could be a bandit's whore for all we know." Going twice. Ezekiel didn't know what made him do it. Maybe it was the boots. Maybe the way she held herself, tied and silent, but not broken. Maybe it was that he'd buried too many regrets and couldn't stand the weight of one more. He raised a single, gloved hand. $1. Gasps rippled. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir? You serious?" Ezekiel only nodded. The gavel came down with a hollow thunk. "Sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. For $1. Ezekiel stepped forward, untied the rope at her wrists with calloused fingers. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. He led her to his horse, mounted up, and without a word to the gawking crowd, rode east, toward the hills where no lawman bothered to chase. Behind them, the whispers started like dry grass catching wind. "Brandt's finally gone mad. What if she's a runaway? What if she's a witch?" But Ezekiel wasn't listening. His eyes stayed forward, on the road, even as a storm of fate gathered behind him. And behind him, in silence, rode the mystery he'd just bought for $1. The sun had dipped low by the time Ezekiel Brandt turned off the main trail and headed into the hills. The woman rode behind him on the mule, silent, unmoving, her head still cloaked in that stained burlap sack. He had loosened the ropes at her wrists, but hadn't dared remove the sack just yet. Truth was, he didn't know what to expect beneath it. The path narrowed through mesquite thickets and rocky turns. Coyotes called from distant ridgelines, their cries high and lonesome. Ezekiel's horse, a gray gelding named Harrow, kept a steady pace. The mule plodded behind, carrying the mystery woman as if she weighed nothing at all. Ezekiel didn't speak, neither did she. He'd tried once, half an hour into the ride. "You hurt?" he'd asked, voice low, rough with disuse. No answer, not even a nod. "Got a name?" He tried again. Still nothing. Now, as the sky turned violet and the first stars blinked into being, the silence settled deeper between them. The kind of silence that didn't just come from two people riding alone, it came from history, from scars too fresh or deep to speak of. Ezekiel kept glancing over his shoulder, not at her, but at the trail. He'd lived too long alone not to notice when he was being watched. And that auction, something about it hadn't sat right. A woman sold like cattle, no one bidding but him. Too easy. His jaw clenched. If someone was following, they were smart enough to keep their distance. They crossed Dry Wash Creek, just as the moon rose silver above the scrublands. Ezekiel guided the animals through the shallows, boots dampening in the cold water. On the far side, he paused atop the ridge and pointed. "That's Brandt's Hollow," he said, more to fill the void than anything. "What's left of it?" Below, nestled in a pocket of cedar and stone, lay his ranch. 2 buildings, a broken corral, and a well that hadn't run dry in 15 years. The windmill turned slow, creaking like an old man's bones. The woman didn't react. Not even a turn of the head. He sighed. "You'll sleep in the main house. I take the barn when there's company." Still, she said nothing. By the time they reached the cabin, the stars had blanketed the sky in full. Ezekiel dismounted, tied off the horses, and helped her down. Not because she needed it, but because it felt right. She flinched when his hand touched her arm. He stepped back. "All right," he muttered. "Let's get you out of that sack." She didn't resist. Didn't help either. He reached up slowly, as if diffusing a bomb, and untied the knot beneath her chin. The burlap came away with a whisper of dust and sweat. But he didn't look yet. Not fully. He turned first, lit the oil lamp beside the door, and pushed the cabin open. "Go on," he said, motioning. She stepped past him into the flickering light, and when he finally followed her inside and turned to look, his breath caught. Beneath the bruises and dried blood, beneath the grime and silence, was a face too young for such weariness, and eyes that didn't belong to a servant or runaway. They belonged to someone born of fire, and carrying secrets like scars. Ezekiel lit the lamp with steady hands, though his heart was anything but. The woman stood just inside the doorway, unmoving, her eyes flicking about the room with quick, deliberate glances. Windows, exits, weapons. She wasn't dazed. She was calculating. He'd seen that look before. Not on a woman, though. On men back from raids who didn't trust quiet or kindness anymore. "You hungry?" he asked, setting the lamp on the table. She gave no reply. He moved to the stove, lifting the iron lid to check the embers. Still warm. Ezekiel added a few chips of mesquite and placed a pot on top. Beans and bacon, what he had. The woman remained silent behind him. After a moment, he looked over his shoulder. She was removing the shredded gloves from her hands. Delicate hands, though calloused. Not the hands of a pampered ranch wife, nor of someone new to hardship. "I ain't asking questions," he said quietly. "Ain't none of my business how you ended up there." He ladled food into a tin bowl and slid it across the table, along with a clean spoon. She sat, finally, and lifted the spoon without a word. Ate slow, measured. Every motion said control, even the way she avoided meeting his gaze. "My name's Ezekiel Brandt," he added. "You're welcome to stay the night. I got a spare room down the hall. You'll find blankets on the bed, pitchers full." Still, she didn't answer. He watched her eat in silence, the only sound, the faint crackle of mesquite and the soft clink of tin on tin. Then, softly, just as he'd given up on hearing her voice, "Lena." He looked up. "Beg pardon?" "My name," she said. "It's Lena." It was the first time he heard her speak, and her voice carried the weight of someone not used to being listened to. Low, firm, like a statement more than a gift. "Well, Miss Lena," he nodded. "You're safe here." She didn't thank him, just stared down at her food. Ezekiel didn't push. Instead, he stood, poured water from the basin, and began washing his hands. As he scrubbed, he saw her eyes drift, just slightly, toward the rifle hanging above the mantel. She was still sizing up her surroundings. Not trusting them, not trusting him. He couldn't blame her. When she finished her meal, he pointed to the back hallway. "First door on the left. It locks from the inside." She rose, carrying the bowl to the sink, rinsed it herself, then, without another word, disappeared down the hall. Ezekiel stood there long after the flame had dimmed. Lena. A name now. A face, too. Bruised, but proud. Mistrustful, but not broken. Who had tied that sack over her head? And who had she been before it happened? He glanced out the window into the night. The wind had picked up, and out past the cedar line, something stirred in the dark. He had a feeling this was only the beginning. Mornings on Ezekiel's ranch came early, whether you'd slept or not. At first light, the rooster crowed, and the sun spilled over the distant hills like a slow flood. The frost on the fence posts melted as the day warmed, and the silence of night gave way to the creak of saddle leather and the snort of horses in the corral. Ezekiel was already splitting kindling when he heard the back door creak open. Lena stepped out, wrapped in a wool shawl from the guest room. Her hair, now clean, was darker than he'd expected. Midnight black. She moved with a quiet grace, like someone used to vanishing into her surroundings. She didn't speak, just walked to the pump, filled the tin bucket with water, and carried it like she'd done it all her life. Ezekiel watched from the chopping block. "You don't have to help." "I know," she said, and disappeared inside. From then on, she worked, not out of obligation or fear, but with a quiet purpose. She fed the chickens, swept the porch, even patched a tear in the feed sack hanging by the barn. But she never talked much, and never asked questions. Ezekiel kept his distance. He'd lived too long with his own ghosts to go chasing someone else's. But he couldn't help noticing things. The way she flinched at distant gunshots, even from the hunting rifle 2 ridges over. The way she avoided mirrors. And the way she stood sometimes on the back porch at night, staring east like she expected someone to come riding out of the dark. Ezekiel had seen that look before. The year his wife and daughter were killed during a border raid. He hadn't spoken for a week after that. Just dug 2 graves behind the house and built a fence around them. That fence was still there. Late one evening he found Lena staring at it. "Your family?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ezekiel didn't answer at first, just nodded. "My wife. Little girl, too." She said nothing, only studied the wooden crosses weathered gray by sun and time. "They didn't do nothing to nobody," he said, not knowing why he spoke now. Just in the wrong place when the devil rode through. Lena's hands curled into fists. He turned to her. "You don't have to tell me what happened. I know," she said again, her voice sharper this time. "But I will." Ezekiel didn't push. He just left her there, with the silence and the wind. Later that night, as he lit the last lantern in the barn, he found himself wondering, not for the first time, who exactly she was running from, and if they might already be closer than she realized. The rain came in the night, soft and steady. Not a storm, just enough to soak the ground and bring the scent of wet cedar drifting in through the windows. Ezekiel couldn't sleep, too much on his mind. The girl, her silence, the way she worked as if earning every breath, and the feeling, growing stronger each day, that something was closing in. He rose before dawn, stirred the stove to life, and poured himself a mug of black coffee. As the cabin warmed, he walked into the back room, the one he hadn't entered in years. It was dusty, still full of the life that once was. A child's rocking horse sat in the corner. A faded quilt lay folded at the foot of the narrow bed. On the wall, a photograph. His wife, Martha, smiling faintly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, their daughter perched on her lap. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened the small pine box he kept beneath it. Inside were keepsakes: his wife's hair comb, a silver ring, a yellowed envelope never sent. He unfolded it slowly. The writing was Martha's, neat and looping. "Ezekiel, if anything happens while you're away, I need you to know I forgive you. I know you didn't want to choose sides, but this land doesn't let a man stay neutral. There's something coming. Something ugly. If they come here, I'll do what I can to protect our girl. But if I fall, know it wasn't your fault. And don't let grief turn you into stone. Love, always, Martha." Ezekiel's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter again. He'd never mailed it because she'd never lived long enough to finish it. He'd found it on the table after burying them both. He slipped the letter into his pocket, unsure why he took it this time. Maybe because he was starting to feel like the past wasn't done with him yet. When he stepped outside, he found Lena at the well, drawing water by lantern light. She looked over, something unreadable in her expression. "You all right?" she asked. "Reckon I'm fine." But he wasn't. Not really. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the rain, Ezekiel thought about Martha's words. This land doesn't let a man stay neutral. He'd tried for years to live in peace with no side but the land. But peace, he was beginning to suspect, was the one thing this land never let a man keep for long. Ezekiel saddled Harrow just after sunup, tying a small canvas sack of dried beans and coin to the horn. He hadn't meant to go into town that day, but the oats were low and the hinges on the barn door had finally given out in the night. Lena didn't ask where he was going, just handed him a list she'd scratched in charcoal on the back of an old flour sack: needles, soap, more salt. She didn't say goodbye either, just returned to mending the porch steps like she belonged there. He found himself thinking about that all the way to Bellwether. The town hadn't changed. The same chipped paint on the general store, same cracked bell above the blacksmith shop. But as he rode in, he caught it, conversation dropping as he passed, eyes watching longer than they ought to, a stillness behind the curtains. Inside the store, Ezekiel greeted the clerk with a nod and dropped his list on the counter. Oats, hinges, salt, if you got it. The young man started collecting items, but Ezekiel caught a whisper from the two ranch hands near the stove. Said she vanished 3 nights ago. Put $1 down on a ghost, more like, heard Horace Blackthorne himself is looking. Ezekiel's back stiffened. He turned slowly. You saying Blackthorne's in town? The first man blinked. Not him, no. Just his men, asking questions about a girl. What kind of girl? The second one hesitated. They say she's his daughter, ran off. One fella swears she got sold up at the auction 2 counties over. Ezekiel's gut turned to ice. He remembered the boots, the way the auctioneer hadn't said a name, the hush in the crowd. She dangerous? He asked. Casual-like. The first man laughed nervously. Hell, anything that runs from Horace Blackthorne's house is either dangerous or dead already. Outside, thunder rumbled from the distant hills, but the sky stayed clear. Ezekiel paid for his supplies, tipped his hat, and left without another word. He mounted up and turned Harrow east, kicking into a faster gait. All the way back through the hills, one thought beat in his chest like a war drum. Lena wasn't just running, she was being hunted. The wind shifted that night, dry and cold, carrying a silence too sharp to ignore. Ezekiel felt it in his bones as he stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, and scanned the tree line beyond the barn. Lena stood beside the chicken coop, lantern in hand, though all the hens had been shut in hours ago. She wasn't checking on animals, she was watching too. You feel it? He asked. She nodded, just once. Something's out there. He hadn't told her what he heard in town. Not yet. No use stirring panic in someone already haunted. But her instincts were sharp, and she was too calm for someone unfamiliar with danger. Ezekiel knelt beside the porch step and slid a loose plank aside. Beneath it lay 2 loaded pistols, wrapped in oilcloth. He hadn't touched them in years, not since the raid that left his land soaked in silence and memory. He handed one to Lena. She took it without flinching, checked the cylinder. 6 shots? Everyone counts, he said. They kept the lanterns low that night. No fires, no sound, just waiting. Around midnight, Harrow gave a nervous whinny from the corral. The chickens rustled in their coop. The wind dropped altogether. Then, hooves. Faint, but close. Not a wagon. Not travelers. Riders. 3, maybe 4. No torches. No voices. Just the rhythmic thump of horses approaching from the North Trail, too close to the property line for it to be coincidence. Ezekiel pressed his back against the cabin wall, rifle steady in his hands. Lena moved to the opposite side of the door, pistol drawn, face calm. The riders didn't come to the porch, not yet. They circled, once, twice, then silence. Lena whispered, "They're scouting, watching how we move, checking defenses." Ezekiel didn't answer. He didn't have to. He knew that kind of tactic. He'd used it himself once, in another life, before the border raid, before the graves. The riders didn't attack that night, but when dawn broke, Ezekiel found the proof in the dust, hoofprints deep and deliberate, circling the barn and fading off into the hills. He turned to Lena. "Someone's found you." She didn't argue. She just asked, "What now?" Ezekiel's voice was low even. "Now, you tell me who the hell you really are." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows against the log walls. Ezekiel leaned against the table, arms crossed, watching Lena from beneath the brim of his hat. She stood with her back to the flames, her face unreadable, the pistol still at her side. "I figured you were trouble," Ezekiel said, voice low, "but I didn't reckon on that kind of trouble." Lena didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, eyes steady. "I'm not gonna lie," she said. "Not anymore." Ezekiel said nothing, just waited. Lena exhaled slowly, as if unwrapping a story she hadn't meant to share. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but firmer. "My name is Lena Blackthorne. My father is Horace Blackthorne." Ezekiel's jaw clenched. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory did. Leader of a band of outlaws who ran guns, robbed payroll coaches, and enforced silence with blood. A man whispered about in saloons and prayed against in churches. Ruthless, calculating, and untouchable. "I ran," she continued, "after I saw him kill a man. One of his own lieutenants. Shot him in the head at supper. Said he was a traitor, but I knew better. He was just trying to leave." Ezekiel's grip on the table tightened. "He saw me watching," Lena said. "Didn't say a word, just looked at me, long and cold. Next morning, I was gone." She turned toward the fire, her voice thickening. "Figured if I kept moving, stayed off the main roads, maybe I'd disappear. But his men are like hounds. I saw them at the auction. Thought if I stood still, they wouldn't look too close." Ezekiel rubbed his jaw. "So you put yourself on the block. Let 'em think you'd been caught." Lena nodded. "I thought it was the only way. Let fate decide who bought me. But I didn't count on someone decent." Silence hung between them, broken only by the wood shifting in the hearth. "He won't stop," she said finally. "My father, he'll keep coming, not to save me, not out of love, because I know too much. And he can't afford loose ends." Ezekiel stared at her for a long moment, then turned, walked to the window, and looked out toward the hills. The morning light was creeping in, pale and thin. "You should have told me sooner," he said, voice tight. "I was afraid," she admitted. "So am I," he replied, then added, "but not of your father." She didn't ask what he was afraid of. She didn't have to. They both knew it was the price of doing the right thing. By noon, the posters were already nailed up in Bellwether and the towns beyond. "Wanted, Lena Blackthorne, alive, $500 per dead, $300 suspected of treason, theft, and conspiracy against the Blackthorne riders. Last seen near Bellwether." The ink was still wet when Ezekiel spotted one nailed to the post outside McCleary's feed store. The face drawn was unmistakable. Hair dark as coal, eyes sharp as flint. And below, the name that would pull every greedy hand west of the Mississippi toward his quiet ranch. He tore the poster down and shoved it into his coat. By the time he got back home, dusk was spilling into the valley. Lena was hauling water from the well, same as any other day, but her eyes found his immediately. "You saw it," she said. He nodded, handed her the crumpled paper. She unfolded it slowly, then just stared. "They want you dead for less than they want you alive," Ezekiel said. "That's the kind of arithmetic your father deals in." Lena didn't respond, just folded the paper and tossed it into the fire. Ezekiel paced the floor. "You don't put a price like that on someone unless you want her brought back fast." "Or buried," Lena added. "You got somewhere else you can go?" She shook her head. "Nowhere he won't find me." He looked out the window, toward the hills darkening under the setting sun. He could feel it in the air, like a distant rumble before the thunder. The storm was coming. "I never wanted trouble," he muttered. "Built this place stone by stone to avoid it. And I brought it to your doorstep," she said, voice soft. Ezekiel turned to her, something hard rising in his chest. "Maybe so," he said. "But trouble came long before you did. It's just been waiting for a reason." Outside, an owl called from the cottonwoods. Inside, two fugitives, one by blood, the other by silence, stared down a future that now had a price tag nailed to every tree between here and Kansas. And every bounty hunter west of the Pecos would soon be coming to collect. The next day brought a wind from the south, dry, restless, carrying the scent of leather and gunpowder. Ezekiel was fixing the broken hinge on the barn door when he heard the hoofbeats. Just one horse this time. Slow, measured, not a raid. Not yet. He stepped out with his rifle resting across one arm as the rider crested the ridge. A tall man, lean, with a long coat dusted in road grit and a face weathered by sun and sin. He dismounted calmly, tied his horse to the rail and tipped his hat. "Brant," he said. "It's been years." Ezekiel squinted. "Saul Crenshaw." Saul smiled. "Didn't figure you'd forget me." He hadn't. Saul was an old gun hand, once deep in Blackthorn's inner circle, rode with them during the siege on Calico Ridge. Disappeared after a bloody ambush that left half a cavalry unit dead. "I ain't here to fight," Saul said, hands raised. "Then say what you came to say." Saul leaned against the fence post, watching the wind stir the dry grass. "There's men coming, Zeke. Lot of 'em. You know Horace. He don't leave things unfinished." "I figured. But he don't want a war," Saul added. "Not if it can be avoided." Ezekiel's brow tightened. "So what's this? A warning?" "A deal," Saul said flatly. "You hand her over, right now. No blood, no fire. Just you and your land. Left alone." Ezekiel said nothing. "She's his daughter," Saul continued. "You think you're protecting her, but she don't belong to you. She's Blackthorn's blood. That means something. And if you give her back, you get to walk away." Ezekiel looked toward the cabin. He could just barely make out Lena's silhouette in the window, her face unreadable. "I ain't giving her to a man who'd put a price on her life," Ezekiel said. Saul pushed off the post, spitting into the dirt. "I told him you'd say that. Told him you were too damn noble for your own good." "Then why come at all?" Saul looked him in the eye. "Because I owed you one warning, one offer. Now I've made it." He swung into the saddle, tightening the reins. "You got till sundown tomorrow. After that, I ain't coming to talk." Ezekiel watched him ride away, the dust rising behind like smoke from a fuse already lit. Inside the cabin, Lena stood at the door, pistol in hand. "What did he want?" she asked. Ezekiel didn't look at her when he answered. "He offered to leave me in peace." She stepped forward. "And?" "I told him peace ain't worth buying with betrayal." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land. And in the hills beyond, the silence grew heavier, like something holding its breath. They came as the sun kissed the rim of the hills. 10 riders in a wide arc, kicking up dust that shimmered like smoke in the golden light. No war cries. No warnings. Just the cold silence of men who didn't plan on leaving witnesses. Ezekiel saw them first from the roof, hammer still in hand. He dropped it without a word, slid down the side, and grabbed his rifle from the porch. "They're here," he said, as Lena stepped out of the cabin, already armed. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. They moved in practiced rhythm now. Shutters bolted, oil lamps extinguished, livestock set loose from the corral to draw fire or block paths. Ezekiel took the front, Lena the loft window above. The hollow was a natural fortress. He'd picked it for that reason. But even stone can fall to fire in numbers. The riders dismounted just out of range, weapons gleaming as they spread wide. Then came the voice, deep, echoing across the canyon like a sermon from a grave. "Ezekiel Brant, you got something belongs to Horace Blackthorn." Ezekiel raised his rifle to the porch rail, sighted on a figure leaning against a black horse, coat open to reveal a glint of silver at his belt. "If you mean Lena," he called back, "she ain't a thing. And she don't belong to no one. A pause. Then laughter from the men behind the speaker. Not the good kind. She's got a debt to pay, Brant. You think your wall's gonna hold back what's coming? You try crossing that fence, Ezekiel growled. And we'll see who holds what. The speaker stepped forward a pace, arms spread. Then so be it. The first shots cracked sharp across the clearing. Wood splintered beside Ezekiel's head as he ducked behind a beam. Lena's pistol barked twice from the loft, and one rider tumbled sideways off his horse with a cry. Smoke thickened fast. Ezekiel fired methodically. One shot, one breath. He dropped two before the rest scattered, using the trees for cover. A lantern shattered near the barn, and flames leapt up in the hay, lighting the sky in orange streaks. Lena's voice rang out. "They're trying to circle! Hold the line!" Ezekiel called. They fought like wolves. Together, fluid, fierce. Lena moved like she'd done it before. Reloading smooth, eyes cold, shots finding targets. Ezekiel was stone, unshakable. Every bullet a barrier between his home and ruin. Then, quiet. A pause in the gunfire. Just the crackle of the barn burning, and the fading echo of hooves retreating into the trees. Lena leaned out from the loft, panting. "Did we win?" Ezekiel's eyes never left the tree line. "No," he said. This was the opening hand. And he was right. Because the real devil hadn't yet come to call. Morning came with the smell of smoke and blood in the dirt. The barn was a blackened shell, horses scattered to the hills, and the porch bore the scars of bullets and fury. Ezekiel stood watch, rifle across his lap, as the wind whispered warnings through the valley. Lena sat on the steps, cleaning her revolver in silence. Neither of them had slept. Not long after sunrise he appeared. Horace Blackthorn. He rode alone through the hollow's mouth, tall in the saddle, wrapped in a long black coat that flapped like a crow's wings. He dismounted slow, deliberate, and left his rifle on the saddle. His hands were bare, a gesture of truce, but one soaked in menace. Ezekiel rose, rifle ready. Lena stood beside him. "Horace," Ezekiel said. His voice held no welcome. The outlaw looked older than his legend. Deep creases, white in his beard, but no less dangerous for it. His eyes, dark and steady, landed on Lena. "Girl," he said low. She didn't answer. "You got something that belongs to me, Brant." Ezekiel didn't move. "She don't belong to nobody." Horace took a step closer. "I ain't come to fight. Not yet. I came to speak." Lena's voice rang sharp. "Then speak, and go." Horace's face hardened, but he obliged. "You left without a word. After all I gave you, after all I built for you." Lena stepped forward. "You built an empire of murder. You killed men for loyalty, and called it law. I saw what you did, and I won't be part of it." Horace's eyes narrowed. "You're my blood." "No," she said. "I'm your shadow, maybe. But I ain't your echo." Ezekiel watched the exchange like a man standing between two powder kegs. Horace looked at him. "You think you're saving her, Brant? That girl's got poison in her name. You keep her, and she'll bring hell to your door till the land forgets your name." Ezekiel didn't blink. "Then I'll teach hell to farm." The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Horace took one step back, eyes locked on Lena. "This is your last chance, girl. Come with me now, and I'll forget this place ever stood." She shook her head. "You already burned too much." His jaw tightened. "Then whatever happens now is on you." He turned and walked to his horse without another word. But as he mounted, he spoke loud enough for the canyon to carry his vow. "I'm coming back, with every man I've got. You best be ready." Ezekiel and Lena stood together as the hooves faded into dust. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Because when the devil says he's returning, a wise man starts counting bullets and digging trenches. He came back as promised, 3 days later, with twice the firepower and none of the talk. Horace Blackthorn rode at the head of 20 hardened men, every one of them armed to the teeth, their eyes filled with the kind of purpose that comes with gold and fear. They made no attempt at stealth this time. The ground thundered beneath them. This wasn't a raid, it was a reckoning. Ezekiel and Lena stood at the edge of the cabin, both armed, both ready, but neither one moved as the riders came into view. The hollow felt tighter now, every tree a sentry, every shadow a judge. The horses stopped in a line. Horace dismounted. He came alone again, walking across the dead grass with his coat billowing behind him, stopping only when he stood 10 paces from the porch. "Lena," he said. She stepped forward. "I warned you." "I remember," she said quietly. He turned to Ezekiel, eyes narrowing. "You still standing in front of my bullet, Brant?" Ezekiel raised his rifle. "Still got a few rounds left in me." Horace's hand hovered near his holster, just enough to let the message hang. Then he drew and pointed the gun straight at Ezekiel. That's when Lena moved. She stepped in front of Ezekiel, arms outstretched, her own pistol hanging forgotten at her side. "Stop!" she shouted. "This ends now." Horace didn't fire. Not yet. But his grip didn't loosen. "You think you can stop this with words?" he growled. Lena didn't back down. "If you shoot him, you kill the only man who ever treated me like a human being. Not a daughter, not a pawn, just me." Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't. "I'm not your soldier, I'm not your blood, if blood means becoming what you are." Horace's jaw twitched. His arm wavered. "You would trade your kin for this?" he hissed. "No," she said, her voice soft now. "I'm not trading anyone. I'm choosing, and I choose not to become you." The air was thick with silence, the kind that wraps around a man's neck and waits for the pull of a trigger. Ezekiel didn't breathe. Horace's arms slowly lowered. His gun dropped to his side. Not in surrender, not in peace, just silence. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his horse. Mounted. Rode away. His men followed, confused, some glancing back over their shoulders. No gunfire, no parting shot, just dust, and a father's shadow retreating into the hills. Lena collapsed to her knees. Ezekiel stepped beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. It was over. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like mercy. And mercy, in the West, was rarer than gold. The world held its breath as Horace Blackthorn leveled his revolver at Ezekiel Brant. No commands, no bluster, just a quiet decision in a dying man's eyes. And then, Lena moved. She stepped between them with a calm that stopped time itself. Her hands were empty, her back was straight. Her voice, when it came, was clear and unshaken. "If you're going to shoot," she said, "you'll have to go through me." Ezekiel tried to pull her back, but she held firm. "Horace," she said. "Not father, not pa, just his name. This ain't about pride anymore. It's about what's left of your soul." The old outlaw's jaw tensed. His finger tightened just enough to whisper over the trigger. Lena didn't plead. She didn't cry. She told a story instead. About the night she ran, about watching him execute a man like it was a chore before dinner. About how her mother died while he was off chasing silver and vengeance, too busy to bury the woman who had once believed he could change. "I grew up in your shadow," she said, "but I won't live there anymore." She looked back at Ezekiel. "He gave me a place without asking for anything in return. He never raised a hand to me, never told me who to be. That's what a real man does." Then she turned to her father one last time. "I don't want your forgiveness," she said, "and I don't need it. But I want you to see me." For a long moment, Horace just stared at her. And for the first time in 20 years, he blinked like a man trying to remember something soft. A lullaby, maybe. A tiny hand gripping his finger. His revolver dipped. He holstered it without a word. Then he turned his horse without looking back and rode into the hills with the sun setting behind him. Weeks passed. The hills turned green again with spring rains, and for the first time in a long while, Brant's Hollow was quiet, not the kind of quiet born of dread, but of peace. Ezekiel mended the corral fence while Lena weeded the new garden beside the porch. Rows of beans stretched in neat lines, their leaves catching the morning sun like prayer flags. It was the first thing that had grown on this land in over a decade. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. Every movement between them had settled into a rhythm, comfort without ceremony. Lena never brought up her father again. Ezekiel never asked. They worked side by side, shared meals, repaired what had been broken. Sometimes they laughed, soft and unexpected. Sometimes they sat beneath the stars in silence, each with a cup of coffee and their own thoughts. One morning, Ezekiel repaired the guest room window, replaced the cracked pane, scrubbed the sill, even stitched up the old curtains. Lena leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "That room getting ready for somebody?" "Maybe," Ezekiel said, not looking up. "Never know who might need a place," she smiled. Suppose that's true. They never called each other family, but every glance, every gesture spoke of something that didn't need naming. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip behind the distant ridge, Ezekiel pulled a folded letter from his pocket. Martha's letter, the one never mailed. He handed it to Lena. "She wrote this before," he stopped. "Before it all fell apart." Lena read it slow, quiet. When she finished, she looked up with misted eyes. "She'd have liked you," Ezekiel said, voice rough with memory. "I'd have liked her," Lena replied, and that was all they said about the past. The next morning, the sun rose clean over Brant's Hollow. No dust, no riders, just wind in the cedars and two people walking the rows of a growing garden. It wasn't a perfect peace, but it was theirs, and in the Wild West that was a rare kind of treasure.